welcome. Today I'm going to be sharing my favourite Oracle decks of 2025. Please do be sure to comment below and share which Oracle decks you have enjoyed using this year and why they have been important to your practice. Now, unlike my top tarot deck list, which was a mixture of indie and mass market, this list consists of all mass market decks, and actually I realised either from Hay House or Rockpool, so I have split them into those two publishers for ease. Some of my choices have been grouped together as one deck, and hopefully that will become apparent as we go through the video. I am going to kick off with my Hay House selection then, starting with the Urban Crow Oracle. And if you saw my top tarot decks video, there's probably no surprise that the Oracle version ended up in my list for my Oracle decks. I didn't really use this deck a great deal last year, and this was one of the first Oracle decks that I added to my collection. And for a long time I felt that the MJ Cullinane decks that I own had always been kind of the messages that they give felt like cautionary tales, and sometimes I was a little bit wary of actually using this deck because quite often the crows told me something that I didn't necessarily want to hear, even though I acknowledged that it was probably something I needed to hear. And yeah, back then these crows and ravens definitely tried to kick butt a bit, but I felt actually this time round, and since I've been pairing it with the Crow Tarot, their message has been a little bit more gentle, and I don't know, just because whether my circumstances have changed, maybe I've learnt some of the lessons that they wanted me to hear the first time round, but yeah, I've had a very different experience using this deck kind of a second time round, and I've really appreciated the messages that they have been giving me. Plus I do love the images, and I just love the whole kind of earthy colour tones that MJ Cullinane has used in this deck. Yeah, the images really speak to me, and what's not to love about crows playing in the puddles there. I mentioned some decks I have paired or grouped together, and this is my first kind of multiple deck pairing to really illustrate as one deck, if that makes sense, which are my Moonology decks, again Hay House. This year really has been a breakthrough year with some of my decks, and no more so than with Yasmin Boland's Moonology decks. I really struggled using these. I think it's because I didn't really feel that the artwork necessarily connected with the keywords, and I had to work really hard to appreciate what these cards were telling me, and I think I really put that down to just not understanding astrology, and I've been doing a bit of work into researching the meanings of the astrology signs, and I feel like I've got a better grasp on things now, and I think that's really helped me to understand why the images are the way they are. And I've also been pairing these decks with other decks which opened up the meanings to me a little bit more, and so I've been using this deck during the new moon, pulling cards just to see what energies are at play each new moon, whereas I've been using the original Moonology Oracle deck during the full moon, and this is a very different vibe in terms of artwork. These I believe were hand painted by the illustrator Nick Rowan, beautiful watercolour art. And actually one of the reasons I wanted this deck is because it had a predominant colour scheme of black and purple, which definitely suits my vibe. And again, struggling with this deck because I just didn't understand astrology. But since deciding to commit and actually to use these as for a specific purpose, I feel like I'm getting a lot more out of these decks now. And you know, if you've struggled with this deck, I would consider persevering with it. I mean, I know some people use these decks simply using the keywords alone, and I think that was another thing that I struggled with, because I felt that the keywords on the cards didn't necessarily correlate to the more expanded definitions that are in the books that Yasmin Boland has written and provided, and I think that sort of contrast put me off a little bit. I feel like the keywords on the cards here are maybe a little bit more positive than some of the deeper meanings held within the book. But again, I think it's just down to experience and sort of really understanding the nuances. I think maybe I came to this a little bit too eager, but now I've done a bit more of an exploration with it, I really enjoy using these decks. And yeah, I've always liked the artwork on both of these decks, and I think I just felt frustrated that I hadn't connected with them in a way that I'd hoped. So I'm really, really pleased that I now feel like I can get something out of these Moonology decks. And I may have mentioned this in a previous video, but I also like to use these cards to place on my altar. I've got a whole section for moon work or Moonology work, where I just, if we've got a full moon, then I'll find the corresponding full moon or new moon, and just place it on my altar to remind me of the energies that may be at play. Likewise, if I do a reading, so in Yasmin's book she has specific moon spreads, then I will also place those cards on my altar as well, so it's kind of like energies for the week ahead, so on and so forth. So yeah, and these make really great cards to sort of contemplate on an altar space. Well, I think so anyway. Just as my tarot list was in no particular order, it is the same for this oracle list. This list compromises of oracle decks that have been either comfort decks, so I haven't necessarily used them for many readings but have found great comfort just looking at the images. They are decks that I have finally been able to connect with, decks that maybe I've had in my collection for a long time, or decks where I simply just love the artwork, and I have been using these images in a wider context, so not necessarily using them for readings, but they are cards that I have been using on my altar, or images that I have used to create and generate my visual journal work. My final selection from Hay House and another kind of grouping are these two Rebecca Campbell decks, and I've talked about these fairly recently on the channel, but I like these decks for different reasons. So we have the Rose Oracle and the Ancient Stones Oracle. So the Rose Oracle for me really has become a comfort deck, and this is the deck that I sort of turn to even if I don't want to do a reading, and I will just flip through the artwork. For me, this is a very feminine deck. I just think it's a very soft and gentle deck. I think that's predominantly to do with the very light pastel-y kind of pinky peachy colours, and it's just so gentle. And yeah, I could get quite absorbed just looking at this imagery, and even the keywords are very gentle and very nurturing. And so yeah, I've just enjoyed having this deck about and just knowing that, if I need something a little bit gentle, this is the deck that I can just absorb myself within this very nurturing deck. The Ancient Stones Oracle, however, has a very different energy, I find anyway, and I think I spoke about this in a very recent video, and I said because it is dealing with stones and potentially ancient sacred beings and ancient knowledge, this deck just feels very grounding. And I think I said, as an earth sign, as a Virgo, I really appreciate just engaging with imagery and colours and themes of that grounding nature. And I've yet to explore this deck probably to its full potential. This is a deck that you could use to connect with ancestors. The spreads that are in this deck also invite you to call upon the wisdom of the stones, which is embedded knowledge from a perspective of kind of time expanding beyond or prior to the human experience. And the readings that I have done with it have felt quite profound. Moving on to my Rockpool selection, and sticking with kind of earthy, grounded energy and a comfort deck. This is the Celtic Spirit Oracle by Nicola McIntosh. I've spoken about this deck before, and like the Forest of Enchantment tarot that I spoke about in my other video, which now has an oracle, this deck now has a tarot deck, which at some stage I plan to add to my collection because I just think these cards are beautiful. And this has been a firm favourite of mine since acquiring it. I've had this one a good couple of years now, but I do find myself coming back to this deck time and time again. Like the Forest of Enchantment tarot, this is very much a spring and summer deck for me. Again, tapping into that kind of Beltane, Letha energy. And I've just thought, actually, this is probably another superb deck for tapping into maybe ancestors and doing that kind of work. And I may, as I'm thinking of it, have a go at working, combining this deck with the Ancient Stones Oracle. I think that would harness some interesting results. Let me know if you've actually tried pairing those decks. I'd be intrigued to hear how you got on. But there's something very charming about the artwork, and the characters just have these most gentle, beautiful, caring expressions. Even the animals, very deep and soulful. Plus, I'm really intrigued by a lot of the Celtic patterns that Nicola McIntosh has included in this deck. And yeah, just a beautiful, stunning deck that I think will continue to be a firm favourite of mine. Now, a top oracle list of mine would not be complete without my favourite series, Season of the Witch. So let's talk Season of the Witch oracle decks. There are many things to like about this series, and I am pleased to say that I have all 8 of these decks, so one for each of the Sabbath on the Pagan Wheel of the Year. And some of you will know that I've spoken a lot about the Imbolc Oracle, a firm favourite of mine, but actually it's not in my top oracle decks this year, and I was really struggling to decide which decks to use because I've been using these throughout the year, and I've spoken about this on the channel before. However, as my representation for Season of the Witch to be included in my top decks list, I've narrowed it down to these 3, and I think it's because I've had these ones for the longest in my collection, and so I've been using these at least 2 or 3 times now, and I've had a chance to build a stronger relationship with these decks. And I've chosen each of these decks for different reasons. So starting with the Beltane Oracle, and I should say I have been using these with the corresponding Sabbat, so I got this out around May time, and this, as you'd expect, being in the summer, in the height of that time where you'd expect to experience growth, yeah, this deck was really a call to action, and really this deck called me out on a few things, but not in an abrupt way. It's still quite a caring deck, but it's really quite an assertive energy. That's really been my experience this year with this deck, and for that I've really appreciated the more kind of hard line, no nonsense aspect that this deck has presented to me. In contrast, the Mabon edition has been really caring and really nurturing, in a similar vein to kind of the care and nurturing that I experienced with the Imbolc Oracle, which I spoke about in my walkthrough of that deck. But because it's autumn, whereas the Imbolc Oracle is more about coming out of hibernation and rest and moving into kind of lighter times, this deck is more focused on encouraging you to go within. So if you think about maybe the Hermit card in the tarot, that's the kind of energy that this deck has been giving out. So yeah, I think this card probably sums it up. I didn't actually pull this card, but this idea of, yeah, sort of intentionally retreating and thinking about what you want to get out of your spiritual practice or by working with the cards. Rachel from I Am Rachel Newman described this deck as giving you a big hug, and I would totally agree with that analysis of this deck, particularly because I kept drawing this card, which is the Cacao card, which is all about the card reminding you that you are loved and that you're safe and that you're protected, and if that doesn't scream a big hug from an oracle deck, I really don't know what does. And so yeah, I felt very comforted by this deck. The Samhain deck, this was the first deck that I bought from the Season of the Witch collection, and this is the first deck that they produced. I believe this is a really popular deck, and it's a deck that I see a lot of people coming to for shadow work, and whilst I haven't intentionally been using this for shadow work, I'm just using these throughout the year, as I mentioned, the messages that I've been getting from this deck have very much been about embracing my shadow side, and possibly because of the theme of the deck you may expect that anyway, but again, this hasn't been kind of a frightening or a scary experience. It's been very much kind of like, look, we recommend that you connect with your spirits and your darker self, but we're going to hold your hand as you do this, and we're going to protect you. That's the only way I can describe my experience using the Samhain deck this time round. Again, this was another deck that I really struggled with. So the first year I used this, I didn't get on with it at all. I didn't understand what the cards were asking me to do or the messages that they were giving me. And I think it's possibly because I wasn't in that mind space for even considering shadow work. But there's been a natural progression for me this year to head in that direction, particularly with some of the visual journaling I've been doing. And so perhaps because I've opened up to this possibility more, I've been able to access the meaning of the cards. If you're curious to see how this list compares to my list from last year, do feel free to check out this video here. Continuing with Rockpool, this is a new deck to my collection, the Enchanted Earth Oracle, which I was drawn to. Well, it's a nature deck, and I do love nature decks and anything to do with woodlands. And also I really love Amanda Clark's illustrations. I mean, how beautiful is that fox? I haven't used it a great deal for reading, so this is another deck. This is actually quite a comforting deck as well, probably for reasons that I explained in the Celtic Spirit Oracle or the Enchanted Forest Tarot. It's just this idea of coming home, connecting with nature, connecting with wildlife. And again, it's just a deck that you can just absorb yourself into and look at the artwork. So I have been using this deck in a slightly different way rather than using it for readings. This is one of the decks that I've realised that is excellent for journal work. So when I've been doing sort of meditations, some of the shadow work that I've been doing, and I think I spoke about this in another video, I've just been not even pulling a card but finding cards within this deck as a starting point, as imagery to explore kind of the ideas that have cropped up in a visual way. These cards have both found themselves on my altar space. This one I did actually pull from a reading with some other cards, which gave quite an interesting insight and perspective onto the reading that I did, whereas this bear card is one that I actually selected purposefully to go on my altar because I was working with some bear energy, and also use this image to copy from in my journal. And it's just been really comforting having this card on my altar space, so I can kind of see it every day or when I'm working here in my room, and sort of tapping into that idea of protection, which is kind of the message that I got during this meditation that I did. And it means that I can simply get more decks out and make the most of them, rather than having far too many decks than I know what to do with and have lots of decks that are just sat there. I try and find ways to incorporate them in a wider context. Finally then, out of the Rockpool selection is the I Am Queen Oracle by Outi Harma. This was actually an indie deck originally, and the artwork is just stunning. And this is one of the things that drew me to this deck, and it's very different to a lot of the decks that I've had, because a lot of them, as you've seen, are nature-based decks, whereas this one is very colourful and I think deals with human emotion more so than any other deck. And yeah, this is a real invitation to kind of analyse yourself, to find ways that you can tap into some of the energies of these different queens that may be able to support you in any difficulties that you're going through. And again, this is another deck, so like the Enchanted Earth Oracle, I'm currently using this deck as images to go on my altar, and at some stage I probably will journal with these as well, just because I find the techniques that Outi Harma has used in her artwork really fascinating. Sort of her use of colour, her textures, all the patterning and detailing. They're just very creative. And at some stage when I finish my tarot deck and have time to sort of do a bit more hands-on physical art with actual art materials rather than working on a laptop, I think just actually having a go at copying one of these will hopefully reopen and reignite my kind of ability to create artwork using traditional art methods, so whether that's pencils or paint. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. I did mention when I first shared this deck that this is also a really versatile deck, and it pairs wonderfully with so many decks that I wasn't expecting. So a real asset to my collection, and that's why it has ended up in my top Oracle decks video. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, I do have a top tarot deck list which you can watch here, and I will be creating a favourite pairings of 2025 as well, discussing tarot and oracle decks that I feel have worked really well together. Thank you so much for choosing to join me today to have a look at my favourite oracle decks of 2025, and if you haven't done so already, do comment below to share which decks you have been using this year and why you've enjoyed using them so much. Also, I would love to hear from you if you have used any of these decks this year, and share how you got on with them. I'm Sally, this is my channel, Vaudeville Manor, House of Art and Tarot, and until the next video, here are a couple of other videos you can watch in the meantime, sending you much love, joy and peace to you wherever you are. Bye bye.